Damascus, Syria, February 12, 2008. Just before midnight, the Kafr Sousa neighborhood sits quiet under a cold winter sky. This is one of Damascus's more affluent districts where diplomats, military officers, and well-connected businessmen maintain their residences behind high walls and secure gates. There is no one on the streets except for occasional security guards, and from time to time, traffic sounds can be heard coming from the city center. The lights from the street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement that is still wet from the earlier rain. A black Mitsubishi Pajero is parked along Rue Ahmad Hamdi, directly across from a modern apartment complex. The vehicle has been there for 3 hours, unremarkable among the other cars lining the street. No one has approached it. No one has questioned its presence. In a neighborhood accustomed to diplomatic vehicles and security details, a parked SUV attracts no attention. What the few pedestrians passing by cannot know is that inside the spare tire, mounted on the Pajero's rear door, sits approximately 8 pounds of military-grade plastic explosive, configured with a shaped charge designed to direct maximum force toward a specific target. The bomb has been placed with surgical precision, calibrated to kill one man and minimize collateral damage to surrounding vehicles and buildings. At 10:47 p.m., Imad Mughniyeh exits the apartment building across the street. He is alone, which is unusual for a man who has survived multiple assassination attempts over 25 years through paranoia and meticulous security protocols. Mughniyeh is 55 years old, Hezbollah's chief of external operations, and one of the most wanted men in the world. American intelligence regards him as responsible for the bomb attacks carried out in 1983 on the U.S. Embassy and the Marine barracks in Beirut, which resulted in the deaths of more than 300 people. Israeli intelligence, meanwhile, points to him as the figure behind dozens of attacks against Israeli targets, including suicide bombings in which civilians were killed. He has been tracked step by Mossad since the early 1980s. He has survived car bombs, ambushes, and complex traps that killed his associates. And somehow he himself has remained untouched. Tonight, he has attended a reception at the Iranian Cultural Center, a short walk from his safe house. The reception was routine, a gathering of Hezbollah officials and Iranian intelligence officers to discuss logistics and coordination. Mughniyeh believed he was secure enough to attend without the bodyguards who were always with him, because he believed that Damascus, under the protection of the Syrian government and surrounded by allied intelligence services, provided a level of security that Beirut could not. He walks toward his vehicle, a gray Honda parked several spaces behind the black Pajero. His movements are unhurried, confident. He does not scan rooftops or check under his car. He has been told by Syrian intelligence that he would face no threat to his life in this neighborhood and that Israeli operatives would be unable to penetrate Damascus's security apparatus. He is wrong. As Mughniyeh reaches his Honda and opens the door, someone watching from a position with direct line of sight to the street presses a button. The explosion is instantaneous. A sharp crack, followed by a pressure wave that shatters windows across the street. The shaped charge functions exactly as designed, directing most of its force into the space where Mughniyeh stands. The blast throws his body several meters, killing him instantly. The Honda is destroyed, its frame twisted and burning. The rear of the Pajero has been completely obliterated. But the front remains largely undamaged, because its sole purpose was to serve as a delivery mechanism for a weapon that had been patiently waiting for its target to appear. Syrian security forces arrive within minutes, cordoning off the street and beginning an investigation that will ultimately reveal nothing. Hezbollah officials arrive shortly after, furious and demanding answers. Within hours, Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General, will appear on television to announce that Mughniyeh has been martyred by Zionist aggression. Iran will issue statements condemning the assassination and promising retaliation. However, the operation has already been completed. All explosives were detonated remotely, leaving behind no evidence that would directly point to a specific intelligence service. The Pajero was stolen, weeks earlier, and forged registration documents were prepared. The surveillance team that watched Mughniyeh exit the building has already left Damascus, crossing into Lebanon or Iraq through routes established months in advance. What no one announces publicly, what will remain classified for years, is that this operation was not conducted by Mossad alone. It was a joint operation between Israeli and American intelligence, one of the most significant collaborative efforts in the history of both agencies. The CIA provided significant intelligence, logistical support, and authorization for an assassination carried out on foreign soil that violated numerous international laws and diplomatic norms. Mossad provided the operational expertise, the personnel, and the willingness to execute a mission that American officials wanted accomplished but could not publicly endorse. Understanding how this operation came to be requires understanding who Imad Mughniyeh was and why two intelligence agencies dedicated years of resources to eliminating him. Born in 1962 in Beirut's southern suburbs, Mughniyeh grew up in poverty during Lebanon's descent into civil war. He joined Palestinian militant groups as a teenager, learning bomb-making and guerrilla tactics before transitioning to Hezbollah when the organization formed in the early 1980s. Iranian intelligence recognized his capabilities and sent him to Tehran to receive training in covert operations, explosives, and intelligence tradecraft. When he returned to Beirut, he immediately applied his training with devastating effectiveness. The 1983 U.S. Embassy bombing in Beirut killed 63 people, including 17 Americans. The attack demonstrated sophisticated understanding of explosives and target selection. 6 months later, simultaneous truck bombs struck the U.S. Marine barracks and French military headquarters, killing 241 Americans and 58 French paratroopers. As a result of the bombings, President Reagan was forced to withdraw American forces from Lebanon. This became a strategic victory for Hezbollah and cemented Mughniyeh's reputation as a brilliant yet ruthless operative. Israeli intelligence concluded that he had planned both operations, selecting targets, recruiting suicide bombers, and coordinating execution with precision that shocked Western intelligence agencies. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Mughniyeh orchestrated kidnappings, hijackings, and bombings that made him one of the most wanted men in the world. He kidnapped CIA Station Chief William Buckley, who was tortured for months before dying in captivity. He planned the hijacking of TWA Flight 847, during which U.S. Navy diver Robert Stetham was beaten and murdered. He built networks across Europe and South America, recruiting operatives who could travel on Western passports and operate without attracting attention. By the mid-1990s, he was regarded as a priority target by both Israeli and American intelligence. It was believed that his killing would significantly weaken Hezbollah's operational capacity. But killing Mughniyeh proved extraordinarily difficult. He rarely appeared in public, communicated only through trusted couriers, and employed multiple bodyguards who swept locations before he entered. He survived at least 4 assassination attempts between 1985 and 2000, including a car bomb that killed his brother instead. Israeli intelligence analysts concluded that he had an exceptional ability to sense danger, to detect surveillance patterns that others failed to notice, and to spot traps before they closed. Every operation designed to eliminate him failed, often because he changed plans at the last moment or sent someone else in his place. The breakthrough came in 2001, after the September 11th attacks. The Bush administration's global war on terror created new opportunities for intelligence cooperation between agencies that had previously operated with minimal coordination. CIA and Mossad had long maintained liaison relationships, sharing information about mutual threats and occasionally coordinating operations. But the post-9/11 environment removed many of the bureaucratic and legal restrictions that had limited joint operations. American officials, angered by Hezbollah's role in assassinations targeting U.S. soldiers and intelligence officers, authorized the CIA to work more closely with its Israeli counterparts on eliminating shared threats. Mughniyeh topped both agencies' target lists. For Israel, He represented an ongoing operational threat, someone actively planning attacks against Israeli civilians and military personnel. For the United States, he embodied the unpunished murder of American citizens and the humiliation of withdrawing from Lebanon under terrorist pressure. However, he was not an easy target. He was protected by Syrian intelligence, shielded by Hezbollah's security apparatus, and extremely paranoid about Israeli surveillance. Any operation to eliminate him would require years of preparation, extensive intelligence gathering, and a level of coordination between CIA and Mossad that had never been attempted for an assassination mission. The operational planning began in 2002 when a joint CIA-Mossad task force was established to track Mughniyeh's movements and identify vulnerabilities. The task force included case officers from both agencies, signals intelligence specialists, and analysts who specialized in Hezbollah's organizational structure. They reviewed decades of intelligence reports, intercepts, and surveillance photographs, looking for patterns in Mughniyeh's behavior that might predict his future movements. They determined that he relied on Syrian protection, traveled regularly to Damascus to meet with Iranian intelligence officers, and believed that Damascus was safer than Beirut because Israeli agents could not easily penetrate Syrian security services. The key intelligence came from human sources, assets recruited over years who had access to Hezbollah's inner circles. One source, whose identity remains classified, provided information about Mughniyeh's schedule, his safe houses in Damascus, and his security protocols when traveling in Syria. Another source within Syrian intelligence stated that Mughniyeh had grown increasingly comfortable in Damascus, attending receptions and meetings without the extreme security measures he used in Beirut. The intelligence suggested that if an operation could be executed in Damascus, it might succeed where previous attempts in Beirut had failed. Tactical planning required solving several complex problems. First, Damascus was a hostile environment where Israeli operatives could not move freely without risking capture. Syrian intelligence actively monitored for Israeli activity, and any operation that was detected before execution would be shut down immediately. Second, predicting Mughniyeh's schedule was extremely difficult, which made it hard to position an assassination team in advance. He frequently changed his plans, sometimes canceling meetings just minutes before they were due to begin. Third, any assassination had to minimize collateral damage and avoid diplomatic crises that would force the United States to publicly acknowledge its involvement. The solution developed by the Joint Task Force was elegant in its simplicity, but extraordinarily difficult in execution. Instead of inserting a team of operatives into Damascus to conduct a shooting or close-quarters ambush, they would use a car bomb, but one far more sophisticated than the crude devices typically associated with terrorism. The bomb would be placed in a vehicle parked near a location that Mughniyeh regularly visited. It would be detonated by remote control the moment Mughniyeh appeared, ensuring precise timing and minimizing the risk to those nearby. The explosive charge would be shaped to direct force toward the target, reducing collateral damage while ensuring lethality at close range. Implementing this plan required months of surveillance and operational preparation. Mossad operatives, some operating under diplomatic cover, and others as businessmen or journalists, began mapping Mughniyeh's movements in Damascus. They identified the safe houses he used, the routes he traveled, and the locations where he met with Iranian and Syrian intelligence officers. Officials determined that he regularly attended receptions at the Iranian Cultural Center in Kafr Sousa, and that he took part in these events either alone or with minimal security measures. They identified his vehicles, his drivers, and the times when his movements were most predictable. The Mitsubishi Pajero was stolen in Beirut several weeks before the operation, its vehicle identification number altered and registration documents forged to make it appear Lebanese-owned. The vehicle was driven to Damascus via routes routinely used by smugglers and operatives who moved between Lebanon and Syria without attracting attention. Once in Damascus, it was parked in various locations around Kafr Sousa, establishing its presence as unremarkable. Syrian security forces who monitored the neighborhood, saw it repeatedly over several weeks, each time parked legally and attracting no suspicion. The bomb itself was constructed by specialists trained in military-grade explosives and shaped charge design. It was small enough to fit inside the spare tire mounted on the Pajero's rear door, but powerful enough to kill anyone within 5 meters. The shaped charge was positioned to direct maximum force toward the street. This ensured that anyone standing beside the Pajero or walking past it would absorb the full impact. The detonation mechanism was radio-controlled, allowing the strike team to trigger the explosion from a safe distance when visual confirmation of the target was obtained. CIA involvement in the operation extended beyond intelligence sharing. According to sources who spoke to journalists years later, under conditions of anonymity, the agency provided technical support for the bomb's construction, logistical assistance in moving equipment into Syria, and most critically, authorization from the highest levels of the U.S. government. President George W. Bush was briefed on the operation and gave his approval, understanding that American involvement would remain classified while accepting the risk that it might eventually be exposed. The decision reflected the administration's conclusion that Mughniyeh's elimination served American strategic interests and that the opportunity might not come again. On the night of February 12, 2008, the operation moved into its final phase. Mughniyeh attended a reception at the Iranian Cultural Center, arriving around 8 p.m. and staying for several hours. The surveillance team, positioned in locations with clear views of the building's entrance and the surrounding streets, monitored his presence and prepared for the moment he would exit. The Pajero had been parked that afternoon, directly across from the entrance, positioned precisely to maximize effectiveness at the moment the bomb detonated. The strike team had rehearsed the detonation sequence multiple times, ensuring that reaction time would be instantaneous once visual confirmation was obtained. When Mughniyeh exited the building shortly before 11 p.m., the surveillance team transmitted a brief coded message confirming target identification. Mughniyeh walked toward his vehicle, displaying none of the wariness that had kept him alive for 2 decades. Perhaps he felt secure in Damascus, surrounded by Allied intelligence services and confident that Israeli operatives could not reach him. Perhaps his success in evading previous assassination attempts had created a sense of invulnerability. Whatever his reasoning, he approached his Honda without checking his surroundings, without scanning rooftops or parked vehicles, without employing the basic precautions that operational security demanded. The operator responsible for detonating the bomb waited until Mughniyeh reached his vehicle and opened the door, ensuring he was in the kill zone and minimizing the chance that the explosion would occur before he arrived. The detonation was executed with a single button press, activating the radio signal that triggered the explosive charge. The blast occurred exactly as designed, killing Mughniyeh instantly and destroying both vehicles while leaving surrounding buildings and pedestrians largely unaffected. The shaped charge had functioned perfectly, directing its force precisely where planners intended. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Syrian security forces locked down Kafr Sousa within minutes, establishing checkpoints and searching vehicles. Hezbollah officials arrived at the scene, furious and demanding information from Syrian intelligence about how Israeli operatives had penetrated Damascus. Syrian authorities launched an investigation that examined every vehicle in the neighborhood, every recent entry into the country, every suspicious activity reported by security services. They found nothing. The Pajero's origins were obscured by forged documents. The surveillance team had already exited Damascus through pre-planned routes. The bomb components were common enough that tracing their source proved impossible. Hassan Nasrallah's televised address the following day announced Mughniyeh's death and promised retaliation against Israel. He spoke of Mughniyeh as a hero, a martyr who had dedicated his life to resisting Israeli occupation and defending Palestinian rights. Thousands attended his funeral in Beirut, a massive procession through the southern suburbs where Hezbollah flags and photographs of Mughniyeh covered buildings and lampposts. The funeral became a demonstration of Hezbollah's strength and its commitment to continuing resistance, despite the loss of its most capable military commander. Israel maintained its standard policy of neither confirming nor denying responsibility. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, when asked about the assassination, stated only that Israel would not comment on intelligence matters. Defense officials privately celebrated the operation's success, viewing it as vindication of years of effort and a significant degradation of Hezbollah's operational capabilities. Mossad analysts assess that Mughniyeh's death would disrupt ongoing operations, force Hezbollah to restructure its external operations networks, and eliminate the institutional knowledge that only he possessed after 25 years of planning attacks. American involvement remained classified for years. The CIA declined to comment, and U.S. officials avoided answering questions about whether American intelligence had been involved in the operation. The full extent of the CIA's involvement was not made public until 2015, when journalists began piecing together information obtained from former intelligence officers. Bob Woodward reported in The Washington Post that the operation was a joint one, with the CIA providing technical and logistical support, while Mossad carried out the operational execution. The disclosure led to brief diplomatic controversies, but had no lasting impact, as most governments understood that intelligence cooperation between allied countries often involves activities that cannot be publicly acknowledged. The operation's strategic impact remains debated among intelligence professionals and Middle East analysts. Hezbollah did not collapse after Mughniyeh's death. The organization promoted new commanders, continued operations against Israeli targets, and maintained its military capabilities in Lebanon. But some analysts argue that Hezbollah's external operations never fully recovered, that the networks Mughniyeh had built in Europe and South America were disrupted by his death and never reconstructed with the same effectiveness. Others contend that his elimination removed the one individual capable of planning operations with the sophistication and audacity that characterized the 1980s attacks, making subsequent Hezbollah operations more predictable and easier to counter. What remains indisputable is that the Damascus operation represented a milestone in intelligence cooperation between CIA and Mossad. It demonstrated that when both agencies identified a shared threat and received authorization from their respective governments, they could coordinate complex operations with precision and effectiveness. The operation also established precedent for targeted killings in third countries, a practice that would expand significantly in subsequent years as drone technology and improved surveillance capabilities made such operations more feasible and less risky for operatives. For the operatives who participated, the mission represented both professional accomplishment and moral complexity. They had eliminated a man responsible for killing hundreds of people, someone actively planning future attacks that would kill more. The operation was meticulously planned, precisely executed, and achieved its objective without unnecessary collateral damage. Yet they also understood that targeted killings, however justified by intelligence assessments and legal authorizations, raise questions about sovereignty, due process, and the long-term consequences of normalizing assassination as a tool of statecraft. The wreckage left behind from the Mitsubishi Pajero was eventually removed from Rue Ahmad Hamdi. The street was cleaned, and life in Kafr Sousa returned to normal. However, the legacy of the operation extends beyond that single night. It changed how intelligence agencies think about international cooperation in sensitive operations. It showed that even the most security-focused targets can be reached when multiple agencies pool their resources and expertise. And it demonstrated that in the world of covert operations, patience, precision, and partnership are often more effective than direct military confrontation. Imad Mughniyeh's death closed a chapter in the history of Middle Eastern terrorism and counterterrorism. He was not the first high-value target eliminated by intelligence services, nor would he be the last. But the operation that killed him represented something new, a model for how allied intelligence agencies could work together to eliminate shared threats while maintaining plausible deniability and minimizing diplomatic fallout. Whether that model serves long-term interests or simply perpetuates cycles of violence that neither side can end remains an open question, one that each operations architects must answer for themselves as they live with what they have done, in service of objectives they believed justified the means employed to achieve them.